the record button. Thank you. So if you have a comment, please raise your hand. Also let you know that we are recording this. So when you do speak up, if you could state your name so we know who is making a comment. So to start out, I'm going to, Greg Mullen is going to give us a review of the 2007 plan. Greg?
Okay, now I am off mute. Can you hear me, Doug?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Well, hello, everybody. Happy Thursday. Kind of fun to be with the committee again. Pat, Kenny, and I was with you a lot in the early days, starting in 2010 or so. Anyways, so yes, as Doug mentioned, by the way, this is Greg Mullen. As Doug mentioned, I did have a significant role in developing the 2007 draft restoration plan, along with other staff members at our office. I'm going to start with just saying, basically we looked at the injury, groundwater injury and surface water were the two major injuries. The bedrock injury we settled in '99, so this report focused on the alluvium. And the extent of the injury went from the parrot tailings down gradient all the way through the reduction works in Colorado Smelter to the highway interstate where Silbo Creek upper unit started. And during this plan, when we were developing this plan, we took a lot of samples of a lot of media throughout this whole area. Worked with Montana Tech quite a bit during 5 years or so before this plan was finalized. So I just want to mention that because Montana Tech did play a significant role in some of the injury assessment. And you can read the quote we have here: the discharge of contaminated groundwater and contaminated surface runoff, Silbo Creek and BAO result in surface water and stream bed contamination. The contamination of alluvial aquifer potentially discharges groundwater, Silbo Creek and Blacktail Creek. Surface runoff from storms and snowmelt carry the hazardous substances down to the collection system. So next slide. So basically what this plan did, we developed alternatives, three alternatives actually, to focus on the injury and how to mitigate that. One of the alternatives was direct restoration. Second alternative was a mix of primary and replacement type actions. And then a third alternative we had was mostly replacement type actions, such as the Basin Creek treatment plant. So we wrote those as a stepstone, if you would, for the $28 million, which we knew that was what we settled for with ARCO. And what we did here, which was unique from the 2008 settlement, because we had three sites altogether. We also had the Uplands and Clark Fork River. But what the governor wanted to do, and Mike McGrath played a role, of course, and what we wanted to do here was make sure that Butte had a large role in developing the specifics of the restoration plan. So hence we formed the BNRC. Next slide, please. Governor Schweitzer, along with the chief executive, picked you all and formed the group. And that's how we get started with figuring out exactly how we're going to spend that $28 million. And we had a lot of meetings, as Pat remembers, getting to the final point 2 years later, once we started. But with that, I'll let next slide, I think, is Doug's.
Does anybody have any questions on the 07 plan?
I just have one question that it seems to portend that you already knew that the number was 28.1 million in 2007 when the settlement occurred in the fall of 08. What am I recalling that differently?
Right, it took a while, John. This is Greg Mullen. It took a while to be lodged, the actual settlement to be lodged. And it wasn't lodged in 2008, but we certainly had the settlement in 2007. So this report was, part of that final settlement. Consent decree. It was actually lodged with the consent decree.
Okay, well, my question is, was this report, this 2007 report, used to negotiate the amount, or was it the amount negotiated and then you prepared this plan?
Correct, or later.
Okay, thank you.
We had an earlier report that helped form our claim, to get to the 28 million. But then when we knew the exact number, then we developed this plan, and the three alternatives I briefly described all added up to, around 28, 29, with interest million. So good question. That's how it happened.
Thank you.
Welcome.
So after the settlement of and the settlement was known and the consent decree was lodged, that's when the process plan was formed. And this is something that the BNRC, the original members of the BNRC, had started playing a large role in. The process plan basically, and it's still a valid plan today, it's something we use to guide how we make decisions today, describes the process that will be used for developing of the restoration plan or amendments, the entities that are involved, and the criteria that are used to make decisions regarding the expenditures of the damages recovered as a result of the 2008 BAO settlement. If you remember, there were 6 phases of the process plan and also a schedule that was included. The first phase was basically to investigate and educate the council and the public about the BAO injury and the investigations that had taken place. The second phase was to develop the BAO process plan itself. And with that, the 9 legal criteria that are listed in the Superfund law are part of that criteria. And there are also 8 policy, or at least we call them policy criteria, that were derived from the BNRC. And those are separate from the Superfund law, but they are specific to this site and something that the council wanted. And those were those specific criteria are restoration of injured resources, public support, benefits to the BAO area itself, Silverbow Creek ecosystem health, long-term effectiveness, matching funds and cost sharing, coordination and integration with remedy, and normal government function, i.e. they didn't know the normal government function is they don't want to fund normal government function with the natural resource damage funds themselves. The next phase was actually the development of the BAO Restoration Plan with public involvement. And there were over 50 meetings that the BNRC held, working with the public and soliciting people for their ideas and also their thoughts on where this was going. During those workshops, and the little ad is next to this that shows the advertisement. There were over 100 completed suggestion forms from the public about what the restoration plan should look like. At the end of the day, the BAO restoration plan was approved by the governor in 2013, but it is dated 2012. That's just the way it is, or the way it was dated then. So that was the process plan. Does anybody have any questions on the process plan? I would also like to mention that there are some other things, and there's some guiding principles for the council that are laid out in the process plan. It's actually a a good document to go back and review if you haven't looked at it in a while. It talks about how the council is to vote and that type of thing. So from the Butte area, from the process plan that was approved, the Butte Area One restoration plan was then developed. And I'm going to not go into a lot of the history on that itself, but more talk about what specifically is in the Butte Area One restoration plan. And basically what the council worked on with the public through all those meetings were coming up with alternatives of how to spend the $28 million. And at the time, the settlement was in 2008, and by the time the plan was finalized in 2012, that $28 million grew to 32. So the council actually allocated the $32 million. The council considered 4 alternatives. And per Department of Interior natural resource damage reclamation or natural resource damage requirements, there has to be an alternatives analysis, and the BAO plan does an alternatives analysis. 4 alternatives were analyzed: the no action alternative, one action that leaned heavily on waste removal, another action that leaned heavily on replacement of groundwater resources and proposed to provide money to Butte Silver Bow for a lot of groundwater resources or drinking water resources. And then there was the BNRC recommendation or recommended alternative. And that's the alternative that most of you are familiar with. It had several, or the categories for the Upper Silver Bow Creek restoration category. And this category was specific. If you look at the plan, it specifically talks about waste removal in Upper Silver Bow Creek corridor, from the Parrot tailings to the north side and east side diggings to Blacktail Creek, and also the Butte reduction works. So it talks about waste removal from the corridor to restore the groundwater and surface water resources there as well. The next category is the mine cap improvements and re-veg category. And this category was based on revegetation of waste areas that were throughout the Butte Hill to protect the surface water quality of Silver Bow Creek, as we know that the storm water runs off the Butte Hill to Silver Bow Creek. So revegetating those waste areas would decrease the contamination reaching Silver Bow Creek. The exact locations weren't identified, but the plan talks that the council would have input on where these areas would be implemented, or where the actions would be implemented. And they would be led by Butte Silver Bow and Montana Tech doing that. So it sounds like somebody joined and is not muted. Thank you. Also in this category of the mine cap and re-veg is the Montana Tech native plants. They're the native plant group to help assist Butte Silver Bow in revegetating the hill. And as well as one of the ideas that was submitted was Landscapes of Montana had the project at Aspen Grove, and that project has been implemented under this category. There was also a couple of other areas, and some of the areas that were focused on was, for instance, the 100 acres of unvegetated mine areas, which I'll talk about when we get toward the end, because that is actually being done by the CD. The stream restoration category, $4 million was allocated here. And this was to aim for projects to improve habitat along Silver Bow Creek within the Butte Area One and the tributaries that contribute to water quality and quantity within Silver Bow Creek. It's important to note that the riparian habitat the council wanted these projects coordinated with the waste removal and other restoration activities that were going on in the corridor. And that's one reason that not much has been done with this category. The water system improvements, this is the $10 million that was allocated to Butte Silver Bow to assist with constructing the Basin Creek water treatment plant. The stormwater category, the council did not allocate any funding to it, but they did want this as a category listed in the restoration plan because of its significance in the critical need that they wanted this brought attention to for it to be addressed. It would be addressed by others. There's other people that have authority or other agencies that have authority to deal with the stormwater issue, but the council wanted it listed. They didn't allocate money, but they wanted it listed. The recreation category, the members of the council believe that the restoration projects, if executed properly, would, or if the restoration projects were executed properly, would lead to a lot of opportunities for recreation. So the council allocated $1 million to this, but they did defer funding to recreation projects until the remedial and restoration actions within the corridor had been specified and at some level of design. And then the small project category, the council allocated $1 million to the small projects. If you remember, during the development of the restoration plan and the solicitation for projects, many folks proposed projects that could be done. Not all of those actually met the NRD criteria, but a lot of them did. So the council thought that instead of trying to incorporate all of those into a restoration plan, that actually allocating those in a small project grant process later on would be a good way. This was actually done for 3 years, and this is something we'll talk about later as well. There's about $200,000 left in the small project category that can be allocated. So as far as the implementation of the restoration plan, a lot of the work actually would be left to be allocated at or to be spent on projects post once we knew what the remedy was. Many of the things were going to be done through Butte Silver Bow with the BNRC's input, as well as some of the things would be done by NRD with BNRC input, such as the parent project. So for the Butte Area One restoration plan, that's about all I had to go over. And I guess one of the things that we've talked about is trying to do a high level talk on these plans and address specific questions. It'd be easier to try to address specific questions instead of trying to hit all of them in a presentation. So if anybody has any questions, please let me know. Okay, hearing no questions on that, I am going to turn it over to Jim to talk about the amendments that have occurred to the restoration plans, specifically to the parent. Jim? Jim, you might be on mute. Can anybody hear me out there?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Yes, I can.
Yeah, Doug, can you hear me?
Now I can hear
Yes,
you,
I
Jim.
can too.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I don't know. Sorry, folks. Jim Ford, I'm going to take you through the couple amendments that we did leading up and including the Parrot project. The first one was our preliminary conceptual restoration plan, and this was sort of an offshoot, obviously, of the restoration plan itself, but even some of the earlier planning documents. We augured in a little further, focusing on waste sources that were loading to the alluvial aquifer and where it was discharging to the creeks, and the wastes that were along the creeks. So the 2012 plan, as Doug just said, identified the Parrot tailings, Diggings East, North Side, and generally wastes that were in the floodplains as a primary source to the surface water problems we had. We had heard in the 2012 plan during our public comment period that people were concerned about leaving these wastes in place. And consistent with that, this preliminary conceptual restoration plan was just an additional step forward to more definitively look at what could be done in these specific areas. So you can go next, Doug. So what I'm going to show you here, just so I don't have to talk you guys all through it, are the figures that were in the plan of the end land conditions. Now there's figures leading into each one of these that showed how much waste was removed and at what depths and all that kind of stuff. But what you can see here is this is basically what we determined back in 2015 where we would remove waste. Not only that area north of Civic Center Drive, but that green area where we're calling City Park at the time. So it's not a whole lot different than what we ended up designing and what we're implementing today. Next. So this is one of the concepts from the plan that included Diggings East, which is the southern portion there that has those conceptual ponds and the rerouting of Silverboat Creek above the confluence, and then to the north there is the north side tailings. And this was one of the end land use ideas that we had after removing waste in all these areas. Next, Doug. So this was the concept that we had for the Blacktail Creek area. The interstate is just south of the green shaded area. This would all be removed. This would be the removal area. And that was the concept for the realigned, reconstructed creek bed of Blacktail Creek going through there. Now, the last thing I want to say on these is, the state, through the support of BNRC, investigated all these areas. These areas were not being investigated. The one that's sort of left out here was the Butte Reduction Works, which we didn't know about at the time, and we ended up investigating about a year and a half later. But all these areas, the Butte Reduction Works, Blacktail Creek, and the confluence area, Diggings East, North Side, are all being addressed under the CD. So they're all being addressed under remedy, not very, fairly in alignment with what we had in this preliminary conceptual restoration plan. So with that, that's what I was going to say about this document. Are there any questions?
I have a question, Jim.
Sure.
The 2015 amendment, what was the action item of the amendment? Was that the action item that transferred money from streamside tailings remainders to the Parrot account? What was the result of the 2015 amendment?
Well, no, it did not transfer. The Parrot at this time had not been as identified as the primary, project of interest. It was more to flush out in more detail. So each one of these areas, we got volumes of waste, we had estimated costs, You know, we looked at some of the technical difficulties and how they'd be addressed. So there was no definitive like path forward out of this, but the results of this document were the governor deciding to move forward with the removal of the parent wastes, which came later after this document was completed.
So when we call it an amendment, we weren't exactly amending anything from the 2012 BAO plan as much as we supplemented and fleshed out the 2012 plan with more detail and more technical alternatives, etc. It was is that fair?
Yeah, that's a fair summary, John. Yeah, that's exactly what it did. It didn't move any money. It didn't change any categories. It was a finer, detailed look at waste and waste removal areas that were originally identified in the earlier plan, just with more detail. Yeah, we just fleshed things out.
Thank you.
Okay. Why don't we move on, Doug, if there's no other questions?
Okay, and I'd remind people to state your name prior to a question, please.
So let's talk about the December 2016 amendment. This amendment did two things. It fleshed out in fairly fine detail what the parent tailings waste removal project would look like. You know, I would say almost to a bid package level. And it also moved some money within the BAO and BSB groundwater accounts to get the project moving. So next. Doug, thanks. So it described, like I just said, it described the primary work elements, you know, the waste removal, dewatering, you know, demoing the Butte Silverbow shops, utilities, all that kind of stuff, worker and public safety. But it also, and I'm going to get in this more here in a minute, it also went into some initial funding for the project so we could get it going. Next, Doug. So this is a really sort of busy schematic, but I think it works in that it shows all the various components, funding components, how much money and when the money was moved around to ultimately fund the parent project. So I'm not going to go through each one of these boxes. I think we could come back to this later after we talk about the 2019 amendment or any future amendments. But the main point here is we had about $16.5 million come from the Upper Clark Fork River restoration plan. We had about 5 come in from the Butte Silverbow groundwater restoration plan, and another 15, almost 15.5 from the BAO restoration plan. And those are the funding sources for the $37 million budget that we have for the parent project. Now we know we've got these ancillary things. We've got, we hope, money eventually coming from the Blacktail Creek confluence area remediation work that is yet to be done. And then we also have this transfer that's in the works from the stream side Silverbow Creek remediation fund, $2.5 million, which goes back to the BAO restoration plan, and $2.5 million that goes to the Warm Springs Ponds restoration. So with that, are there questions about this or the amendment itself?
I have a question. The one thing I wanted to get at today was that box down there where when the Butte Site Fund, as it's called in this chart, the Butte Site account as it's defined in the CD, goes to the Blacktail Creek project, once the Blacktail Creek project is complete, then it appears there's 3 paybacks that are going back to the BAO Restoration Fund, which is the point of our meeting tonight, then money back to the groundwater account, and then money back to the aquatic and terrestrial account. And I've always been a proponent, just like that first 8.5 million in 2016, and then this subsequent 8 million in 2019, why those dollars would have to go back to the aquatic and terrestrial resource account, because by my definition, they're really the Silver Bow Creek. The money came, that $8 million in 2019, technically came from, and maybe I'm wrong, so please correct me if I am, but it came from the Streamside Tailings carryover leftover account that happened to be put in the aquatic and terrestrial reserves. But it just seems to me illogical that money that is being made available through the Butte CD to do Blacktail Creek, and the expectation that there will be surplus dollars from that 20.5 to go back to these monies, to not make the Butte Area One restoration plan whole first, the groundwater second, and then if and to the extent there are any monies, why would we put it back in the Streamside Tailings account, which then would compel Butte to, and projects designed for Butte to go back to, I guess, that process to receive funding? So that's just more of a comment than a question. It just seems to me that we should re-rack this so that the Butte Area One account is made whole. That $5.3 million is paid back, because that's certainly going to be left once the Blacktail Creek Confluence project is complete. And then the Butte area, the Butte groundwater account, because that money then would stay in Butte, rather than, the way it's written is that the aquatic and terrestrial resource account gets the money first. And that just doesn't seem fair relative to the projects that we have in mind for Butte. So that's just a comment, Madam Chair.
And
Madam Chair, this is John McKee. I see where John says is going there, in that it's curious, in a Butte side fund then being not funneled but transferred downstream. Maybe more than a comment, John. It actually could be a really just genuine question. This was approved, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, when we did the whole re-budgeting, but seeing it in map form, seeing this money go from Butte to this lower UCR FRB account, which can go, many miles away from Butte, that it's probably a good question to ask. And perhaps in our plan, in our BAO redraft plan tonight that we start working on, suggesting that money actually get changed up and come back directly to BAO or BSB, groundwater restoration plans, such that it's used in the place for which it was originally intended. So I think it's actually, John, not a comment so much as a good question.
so this is Doug Martin. I'm going to address that right. Now I know Jim still has a couple of slides to talk about with the 2019 amendments, but the governor approved and was the one that has implemented these amendments in 2016 and 2019. The SST leftover dollars, or dollars that are left over from the remediation of the Silver Bow Creek, per the Streamside Tailings Operable Unit consent decree are to go to the Upper Clark Fork River Basin Restoration Fund. That's stipulated in a court order consent decree. And under that consent, or under that restoration fund, the Upper Clark Fork River Basin Advisory Council has the authority, or the say, the same thing as the BNRC has over the BAO funds. They have the recommendations to the governor of how to allocate those funds. And that's what they have done with these SST dollars. They have allocated these funds to various areas. Specifically, the SST dollars are allocated per the long range plan to areas upstream of Deer Lodge. And in 2016 and again in 2019, the Upper Clark Fork Advisory Council recommended to the governor that those funds be allocated to the Parrot because they see the need for that. The governor has made the recommendation, or made the approval or the determination that if there are dollars left over from the Butte Site Fund, from the current CD that's in consideration right now, that those dollars would go back to reimburse all of the funds that have contributed to the Parrot project. So it's my consideration and my thought that, you know, this is the governor's decision. If the council wants to, you know, make a recommendation to the governor to reverse that decision, it can do that. But I'd also let you know that then you would be stepping on the toes of your sister advisory council, the Upper Clark Fork Basin Advisory Council, because they have allocated a considerable amount of money to the Parrot project. So I think that we're gonna have a battle of councils here. So.
Well, let me ask you to clarify this, Jim. The streamside tailings operable unit leftover dollars, which have been and are considerable, I agree with you that the consent decree says that they shall go to the Upper Clark Fork River Basin account, but there is specific language that says that shall, those dollars, we're not talking about the whole of the aquatic account and the terrestrial account. I'm only talking about the amount that comes from the streamside tailings leftovers. And there is specific language that shall be spent above Deer Lodge. And that's the 8 million. You seem to portend that $8 million in 2019 was coming out of the main fund, the main aquatic dollars or the terrestrial dollars, when in fact, correct me if I'm wrong, these were streamside tailings remainders. And the logic of the original 8.5 million in 2016 is that, you know, the area in Butte from Texas Avenue to the edge of the BAO at west of Metro is also part of Silverbow Creek. And it seems to me it was really elegant that the leftovers from the Silverbow Creek remedy under streamside tailings would be spent on the first mile. And I would just recommend that we do that. We actually ask and appeal to the governor and to the Clark Fork Council. I don't think we should be bashful about that because it makes sense. If there's dollars left from the streamside tailings operable unit, the Silverbow Creek remedy, to reallocate those dollars to the headwaters area seems to me to be a case that is worth making. And you know, rather than, you know, it going back to the aquatic and terrestrial account, but it's earmarked to be spent above Deer Lodge. And then if we need to do a project, we've got to go stand in line down there. And I would be making a recommendation that we do in fact do that. I don't think we're gonna conflict with or have any trouble with the other council. I think we can make a pretty strong case that those dollars are needed in Butte for restoration projects we have in mind. So that's my opinion.
Yeah, and John, I would say that this is Doug speaking. I would say the way you phrased your question this time is differently, where you had actually asked the Upper Clark Fork Council to do something with the dollars. That's different than asking the governor to reallocate those dollars. So
No. I want them to reallocate them so we don't have to stand in line. I guess we're splitting hairs here, but
yeah, we are.
whatever.
So why don't we let Jim finish his presentation and we can move on and we can have the bigger discussion, because it's approaching 7 and I know he has just a couple more slides, and then we can move on to the bigger discussion, which this is a part of.
Yeah, and I will say, John, there are aquatic dollars being spent up in the Butte Basin, on Blacktail Creek, and the golf course and other projects. So it's not like there aren't other, aquatics money being spent, above the Warm Springs ponds.
I concede that, Jim, and we're thankful for that, but Butte should get its fair share of the aquatic dollars as well. As, of course, we've lost the argument so far, but we believe we should get our fair share of the terrestrial dollars as well. But I don't mean to interrupt you.
Okay. Well, so the last amendment was the 2019 last year, and we sort of gone through the nuts and bolts of this really reallocation of the money. That's that figure and the 2019 dates in it. It's basically moved money around for the complete funding of the Parrot project. And then if there are new additional dollars or remaining dollars, how they'll be distributed amongst the restoration plans that initially funded the Parrot project. So Doug, you can go to the next figure. Yeah, so there's the 3 restoration plans, the BAO Upper Clark Fork River and BSB groundwater plan that funded the project. And so this got us full funding so we could complete the removal, and made a plan for any remaining dollars that how they would be broken up and reallocated to the plans, as well as any new dollars. So that's really that in a nutshell, the 2019 amendments, which we just did last September. Are there any questions on this?
Well, I don't mean to belabor it, but if the Upper Clark Fork River Basin Plan amendments identified these dollars as excess in 2019, it just seems reasonable to make the ask that if they were excess then, they're excess now, and they should be preserved for projects in the headwaters.
And I guess, yes, I am making an argument with you, but I want to be clear that I'm not making the argument because I'm not in support of doing restoration in Butte. We are given the charge and accountable for doing restoration throughout the entire basin, and doing that per the plans that have been approved by the various councils, or recommended by the various councils in the public and approved by the governor. So that's what our charge is, and that's what we're trying to do with these with this discussion that we're having here. And there are areas of interest for those other dollars from the SST. That's why the Upper Clark Fork Basin Council allocated those funds upstream of Deer Lodge to the headwaters, including Warm Springs Creek. So there are other use. We know that in general, or not in general, but we know that there are more restoration projects within the Butte area, and within the basin, then there are restoration dollars. So it is a priority to allocate those dollars to priority projects. And those dollars going back to the Upper Clark Fork Restoration Fund to be allocated to priority projects, that's the way that is written, will be done. And if those projects are in Butte, that's where that funding can be allocated to. So it is that those dollars are being allocated to a specific geographic area, and it's not necessarily, they haven't been allocated yet. So just because they go back to the restoration fund doesn't mean they couldn't come back to a project in Butte.
Well, Doug, this is John. I don't mean to belabor this, and I don't disagree with anything that you've said. My goal with tonight's meeting is the BNRC, and it also says very clearly in the consent decree that any leftovers from the Butte site fund be spent in the headwaters. So I'm just saying.
So this is Catherine. Yeah, the CD does say that all of the $20.5 million has to be spent on restoration in BIPSU. What is occurring with the 2019 amendments is that we paid for the parrot ahead of time, and then we're basically repaying the IOU. And so all of that $20.5 million will go to pay for the parrot. So I think that, and I'm not saying, I'm not expressing an opinion on the request to amend the Upper Clark Fork River Basin plan and the BAO plan to rejigger those repayments, but regardless of what the repayment percentages are, all of that $20.5 million will go for either the parrot or the set aside for the inland use creek, and will be in compliance with the CD if entered.
This is Ryan, and I guess I'm just sitting back listening, and I guess Catherine, to that point, if that's the logic or the case, what is there harm in the committee, the council putting forward a letter requesting that money flow to the BAO restoration plan and the BSB groundwater restoration, and ask for consideration for that as the priority funding on those two?
I'm not expressing an opinion on whether there's a harm to it. Legally, it would require an amendment to the Upper Clark Fork River Basin, two parts of that restoration plan, the aquatic and terrestrial and the groundwater plan, as well as the BAO plan. So it would be slightly outside of the mission of the BNRC, because the BNRC was set up to advise on the BAO. I'm not saying but it would involve a bigger constituency than what the executive order that set up the BNRC was structured to address. And it would involve, the governor would have to amend those three restoration plans. And the recommendations could certainly come from the BNRC, but it would also have to involve the other citizen groups and the advisory council. If we're going to follow the same process that we're granting to you, we would need to set up similar working groups and involvement with the advisory council. And I would also add that the governor just did this less than a year ago. So I know others on this call have more of a direct line, but I guess that would be a question I would pose is, has anything changed since September of 2019?
This is John McKee. As a follow-up question to what you just responded, if we were outside of our purview to ask for a change, then how are we inside our purview to vote on the change previously?
Well, you make recommendations to the governor on the BAO plan. We made amendments to 3 different plans all at the same time.
I know we got to get to the BAO part of this, but I just want to be clear here. That 20.5 million, just as this chart shows, first gets spent to do the Blacktail Creek Confluence Area Remediation Project. DEQ gets that done. I'm hoping that that is $6 million in that range. There's $14 million left in that Butte site fund. As it reads now, 51% of that money is going to go to the whatever's left is going to go to the aquatic and terrestrial. 34% of that money is going to go to the Butte Area One restoration, and 14% is going to go to the groundwater. That's how those amendments are written now. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. So what I'm suggesting is that we do make this request, and if we have to make it to the governor or have to make it to whoever we got to make it to, my goals are to make sure the BAO Restoration Plan Fund is made whole, that full $5.2 million, and that the groundwater account gets made whole, and then say that's $10 million, and then 10.5 million, and there's 3.5 more that could go back to the Upper Clark Fork River account, where we could go downriver and stand in line to bring that money back to Butte. I'm going to just defer now to let's get to where we want to amend the BAO plan. But I just wanted to have that context as we amend the BAO plan relative to how many dollars are going to come back to the BAO for us to amend. Thanks.
So
So
John,
I'm-
just to clarify, you want the BAO plan amended, but also we'd have to amend the Upper Clark Fork River Aquatics and Terrestrial, that restoration plan, and the BSB groundwater restoration plan, correct? So we'd need to amend all three of them.
Well, that's what you're, yeah. What I don't know what the process would be. All I know is that what wasn't known when these amendments were being made was specifically how much was going to be in the Butte site account and how it was going to be coming back to those three accounts. I don't want to belabor this. That's the way it's written. That's how the money flows now. I'm just kind of sharing with my colleagues on the BNRC that in addition to amending the BAO plan, which is the workshop tonight that we're going to get to in a sec, that we've got to work hard to figure out how the Butte site account fund in the CD gets spent in Butte, and that's my point. And I know we got to go through some paperwork and some amendments to get there. But whether it's through the BNRC or whether it's as citizens appealing to the governor in a different venue, whatever, that's going to be in the cards too.
Okay, well, just to reinforce what Catherine said, that the 20.5 will be spent and is required in the CD to be spent, in Butte, and will be spent on the parrot. It's sort of a backflow to the reimbursement part, right? So just to make sure that that's clear, we're not taking that Butte site fund money and spending it in other places.
We will be in compliance with the CD. I mean, essentially, we've spent money on the parrot that we're hoping to get back from the CD, right? I mean, that's how the governor structured it in September of 2019. All of that, whatever it is, I'm hopeful. I'm with you, John. I hope it's 14.5 as well. All of that will be spent on the parrot, except for the whatever goes to the other allowable use on the and land use creek. So
I guess I'm just not tracking with when you guys say that. And Madam Chair, I don't mean to belabor this point, but the way those amendments read is that The state gets 20.5 million. That money plus interest first gets spent on the Blacktail Creek Confluence Project. Then you finish that job, and whatever money is left plus interest gets redistributed to these three accounts. When you say it gets spent on the Parrot, I don't understand what you mean. It goes back to the Butte Aquatic and Terrestrial account, 51% of whatever that number is. 34% it goes to BAO and 14% goes to the groundwater account. It doesn't get spent on the Parrot.
Well,
That's where it goes.
It's already being spent on the Parrot. And so we have $36 million, and we're going to, the way those amendments are written in 2019 is that they will repay those three sources of the $36 million pro rata based on their contribution towards the Parrot. We only are getting, 14 or whatever it ends up being. So we can't repay all of them. Basically, there wasn't enough money in BAO to pay for all of the Parrot, so we had to borrow from other funds. The governor's amendments in 2019 had to borrow from other funds to complete the Parrot, and we're repaying some of that borrowing, the best that can be done, including BAO.
Well, and this is Ryan, and I guess I would echo John's point. I think that, excuse me, the contention, or we would contend, or I would contend that since that money's coming from the Butte site fund through the CD negotiations, the priority should be to the BAO restoration and to the BSB groundwater, and not to downstream where then Butte has to go stand in line to get access to that.
And I think that's a fair point to raise to the governor. I think the point we're trying to make is that you'll have to request that the governor will have to amend 3 different restoration plans, not just the BAO plan. And also, I just want to make sure that we're all, if we had not yet done the Parrot and we had waited until the money from BP was in hand, we would be spending that money on the Parrot and then seeking other sources of funding on top of that 14 million.
I guess this is Ryan, and I have a question that maybe we should have raised earlier. Maybe I wasn't paying attention. The blue circle on the left, that's the match fund for future constructed creek. I guess we're talking about arrows going back to the right. What is that arrow that goes to the left, and what could that possibly be? Because there might be a $14 million sinkhole there that I'm not understanding.
Well, that's Ryan, this is Jim Ford. That's the governor's commitment for $1 million for this constructed creek concept or design or for
Gotcha.
match funds. So the Butte Site Fund isn't really restoration money until it reaches these restoration accounts. It's remedial money, and there's this $1 million current commitment to this match fund, and then it becomes restoration dollars when it hits these restoration accounts. I know that's sort of convoluted, but.
Well, I guess, and I don't mean to take a bunch of time on the agenda, but I guess my question would be logistically then, if one of the main issues seems to be the amending of the 3 plans, what's the actual vehicle for that match fund of the future of the constructed creek, the Restore Creek Coalition money? What vehicle is that, and where does that, is it the 6 million for Blacktail and the $1 million comes off of that and then it splits out 3 ways, or does that have to go into another box and then it restores back around? Or I guess I'm wondering logistically, what's the vehicle that $1 million travels in?
I'm not sure, Ryan. It's fully fleshed out. There's this draft MOU between Butte Silver Bow and the state of Montana. that imparts trying to address some of those questions, but I think at this point it's unclear. It doesn't go into any restoration sort of account because it's not restoration dollars. So how exactly it gets transferred and where and when are I think things that need to be figured out.
Okay, thank you. And I guess I would just say, for the good of the order, as we talk about this, we talk about amending it later. I mean, that certainly is something that I'm supportive of and hope others would be as well. But let's make sure that's a priority, and as well as, you know, the other two buckets for Butte.
Madam Chair, this is Ray Vinke with the Natural Resource Damage Program. I'd suggest that this is right at the meat of what we need to discuss. I very much appreciate the comments. But at this point, if we could finish the discussion about Parrot and then put forth what I think is admittedly a more modest proposal from Natural Resource Damage Program as far as amendments, but also one that we see would be consistent with existing amendments and consent decrees, because we want to be, you know, in the narrow time we have left, as productive as possible for the advisory council. So if I may request that we table the existing conversation, circle back to it probably in just 15 minutes or so, but just present sort of a more modest proposal that I think is in the near term more achievable.
Sounds good. Yeah, let's go ahead and we'll get a chance to talk about this again.
Okay, so this reflects, I think many of you will recall this, it's in a different format, but Shannon last week when we were at the last meeting of this BNRC working group, she, you know, told us existing fund balances as of 2021. Now, some of these funds are already allocated, but I just want to, I guess, point out just quickly that starting with just over $30 million and going down to 6, we've done a very good job in terms of restoring injured resources for the people of Butte. We've got a long ways to go, and I think we're brainstorming ways to get there, John and other council members. But I don't just want to start with that and then present just a quick proposal that NRDP has had, you know, in terms of how to address amendment that's very practical, and go from there. So, okay, thank you, Doug. So basically, what we see as very achievable would be there are simply some administrative changes that need to be due, essentially editing and others within the amendment and initial restoration plan, and those would be updating some dates. One of the documents suggested that funds on recreation should be spent by 2016. That's, you know, clearly we'll have an opportunity to go to 2020. And I guess as has been mentioned, we have commitments to basically to develop recreational opportunities at Molten Reservoir to Butte Silverbow, and also recreational development grants for the BMX park. So BNRC has already committed to that. We'd propose that we, you know, advance with those small projects, and that would leave $50,000 as well. It would leave $193 million for us to, you know, either leave in the small grants program or small projects program. I know there's been I've heard from some council members that perhaps small project funds can be used in a better way at this point. So another way, if we were not to go through another round of the small grants program, would be to work on trail development planning and recreation projects within Butte Silverbow. The advantage of some of these projects is we'd be able to implement them in areas that are not undergoing existing remediation. So we saw that as a way that I think would benefit. You know, I've consistently heard interest in connecting the trail systems in Butte, and this that was started. So, and the other, so we've talked about funds that have come back, will come back to the BAO from what the remainder is after work at the Confluence and Blacktail, as well as this 2 million, which DEQ is holding. So one opportunity that the Butte Advisory Council would have, and we have some ideas, but this would be a recommendation you could make, would be what % of funds in these existing categories come back and when they're allocated. So essentially, you know, it would be up to BNRC to decide how to distribute these incoming reimbursements. And you can see there, mine waste, re-veg, stream restoration, recreation, and if we wanted, the small projects category could be another approach. Doug, do you have the next slide, or can you bring up the memo? So if not, I can talk us through it. What I'm referencing, I don't know, have all of you had the opportunity to read our memo of September 2nd? I know it was a short turnaround, and we were responding to a request from you from last Thursday. So if you want to go to, well, start on page 1, Doug, but then go to page 2 of that memo just quickly. And I'd encourage all of you to, you know, closely review these materials we put together. We put a lot of thought into it, as all of you clearly have done, in terms of how we'd spend monies throughout the basin that may come to Butte. So I'm not seeing that screen shared. Should I do that, Doug, or you pull that up?
I'm working on it, Ray.
Yeah,
I
got
think
it.
I started.
You got her done. So if you can make it any larger, that would help, but otherwise we can get there. So can everybody see this memo that Doug just pulled up? So go ahead and start at the top, at the front page, Doug, please. Okay, so this is what we distributed to you just recently. And as I said, these are staff recommendations or opportunities for the BNRC. So number 1, I just spoke about, that's the administrative updates. I think that's pretty simple. Then there's 2, the small project category amendments. Go ahead, go down, Doug, 1 more. So I'm just reviewing what I just spoke about. And 3 would be this, you know, allocation of incoming reimbursements. And as far as something that we see would make sense to allocate incoming reimbursements is some of the funds for mine waste and revegetation were taken. Somebody correct me, I believe it was for the parrot. Is that correct, Jim or Doug? So that there were $2.3 million that were drawn from mine waste revegetation to fund other projects. So we'd like to propose that those funds return to the mine waste and revegetation category, because we see it as critically important to prevent erosion on Butte Hill from flowing into Silver Bow Creek and affecting all the work we've done. So so that's my first, our first paragraph.
Ray,
Yep.
if you'd let me interject here.
Please do.
Yeah, so the 2.3 that was taken from the mine waste category and reallocated in 19 to the Parrot project, there was an estimate of that was based on the fact that the 100 acres of unreclaimed areas was going to be done or going to be treated by remedy under the work plans of the current CD. And that is still the case. So we do believe that although we know that those 100 acres are scheduled to be implemented or treated by the CD parties, that there is also additional work on the Butte Hill to do additional revegetation, additional restoration revegetation to help protect the surface waters of Silver Bow Creek. So what we're making a recommendation here is that a portion of those reimbursed dollars go back to the category. In the amendments, into 2019 amendments, it does say that the dollars will go back to the stream restoration category and the revegetation category. The stream restoration category, with the influx of the 2019 or this SST dollars, the $2.5 million, is basically going to be made whole back to $4 million because there's a $500,000 of interest that has been earned in that category. So that the stream restoration category will be made whole with the $2.5 million coming back from SST or coming to it from SST. So that's why we are proposing that some of the money go to re-veg and then some other money go to other categories, or the council could make a recommendation that it go to other categories for expenditure.
Yeah, thank you, Doug. Do we have let me go through this last sort of closing recommendation. So the other 50% of those reimbursements we think would be appropriate to put to the recreation category because the high value that the community places on the recreation. And that category is relatively lightly funded. So those funds would be contracted through NRDP for Butte Silver Bow Parks and Recreation. And the idea is that BNRC, under this case, would maintain inputs in terms of how those monies were spent. So that's kind of all I have. So it's a suggestion, I guess, for NRDP approaches to how we think we could readily make changes to the restoration plan that we hope would kind of direct these incoming dollars, which I know has been a concern. So with that, Madam Chair, I will yield the floor, and I guess John et al. Have gotten to the meat of some of the challenges that we have. So in terms of how to structure the rest of the conversation, I'm open, but I think we should do so. And I guess an easy way to do it would be kind of to break down, not easy, but one approach would be to kind of evaluate feasibility. So we could look at, as far as the recommendations of council relative to the Upper Clark Fork funds, how that could be achieved, and the steps that would need to be taken. We could also put on the table the NRDP sort of proposals, and they are proposals because that's that's the charge that we have is to offer you proposals for your inputs. So anyway, that's just as far as structuring a conversation, Madam Chair, it's wide up to you and the members, but I'm just trying to kind of see through the fog here, and that would be one thought, is to find what our existing proposals are and kind of split them down the line or come up with a third alternative and head that way. What's everybody think?
Thanks, Ray. I appreciate that, and thanks to all the NRD folks for going over the information here. I guess I would like to kind of go back to our last meeting where we were going to go around the room and kind of poll each member on what their thoughts are on this amendment, and then I think that at least that gets the topics out on the table, and then we can narrow them and discuss them from there. So that would be my proposal. That sound reasonable to folks?
Good thing.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Maybe since we started in the room last time, maybe we'll start on the phone or on the online this time. Ryan, would you like to go first and kind of give us some of your thoughts on what you're thinking for this amendment?
Certainly, yep. And I like the ideas. to me, I like the small project category. I think that there's a lot of flexibility and there's a lot of creativity in there. And so I certainly would lean heavy in that direction.
So your thought is then to continue with small projects and
add to it. Yeah, my suggestion would be money that comes in. Let's add it to that category, and I think really we have the ability as a committee and a council. I think that leaves us the broadest flexibility to spend that money, kind of how we see fit with what projects come before us that are creative in nature and really adhere to the guidelines that were laid out, back at the creation of this council.
Okay. Any questions from anyone on the council for Ryan? All right. Dave, would you like to go next? Not hearing from Dave? Are you muted, Dave? All right, not hearing from Dave. We'll maybe try to get back to him, but John, I think, would you like to talk about how you see this amendment?
Thank you. Yes, I would, Madam Chair. I need to channel one of our original members and, damn him for leaving us, Chad Okrish. But one of the things that he always really paid attention to, and he really called all of our attention to, was the level of public involvement that happened through small projects. Of everything we did, of all the 10 years, 12 years, whatever we've been meeting now, the most involvement we ever had, which was off the chart, was small projects. And I want to call attention to something Ray said a couple minutes ago, and I'm going to do my best. I wrote it down when you said it, Ray, so I apologize if I misquote, but I did my best. It was a high value that the community places to recreation. And I would say that I disagree wholeheartly with that. Not that they don't place a high value to that, but the highest value that our community seemed to place to the work we've done has been small projects. I mean, the listening sessions that we had and the people who showed up, and it was in the hundreds, and it was amazing. And this community, all of Butte, who really cares about this and shows up to the meetings, and the people who constantly stand up and speak, they're constantly standing up and speaking for a lack of involvement. They're feeling of a lack of involvement. No matter how much they say, no matter how much they rail against the obvious injustices, what's going on, they don't feel heard because something else just happens. But when it comes to small projects, it becomes something they can step in. It becomes something that there's an empowerment. And I'm vocally 100% behind what Ryan said, but I'd say every drop of money that comes back to this committee in any form right now should come back to small projects. And I've committed to it in the past, and I'll commit to it again tonight. I'll sit in this committee for another 10 years, another 20 years. If we do a round every year or every 2 years, that's fine with me, because what really seems to give our public that feeling of the most commitment to change has been our small projects. Yeah, we threw 10 million at the water plant, and yes, they are all directly affected by that. And there's nothing to be said that wasn't immediately and hugely impactful. But when you are a single person and not a member of the group, and you can walk in, you can say, I can see change right here, and I need $20,000. I can see change right there. And if someone gives that person $50,000, imagine what could happen. And I'll call attention to one of our small projects, or re-veg projects, which has had one of the largest impacts for the lowest dollar per square foot, is the Stewart Mine re-veg project. And I think we did a lot of that under small projects. So I would challenge our committee, and I would challenge staff at BNRC to rethink the highest value that the community places to our money as recreation. You're missing the boat. the highest value our community places to the money we have is their involvement in its usage. And small projects is the place where they have the greatest involvement in its usage. And I'm committed to that. So thank you, Madam Chairman, for allowing me to comment. And let's go kick ass together.
Very elegant and great way to say that, John. I'm going to give the rest of the council a chance to have any questions for John on his thoughts.
This is Dave. Am I unmuted now?
Oh, you are unmuted, Dave.
Oh, good. I couldn't get the damn thing to unmute. So I would agree with John's points regarding the enthusiasm we got for the small projects, but I just don't know how we're going to do that in the current environment. So that's the one question I would have for the council. How do you envision possibly doing this in the current environment? Or maybe the thing to do is just wait for several months and see what happens. But if failing that, I'm comfortable having Butte Silver Bow administer recreation dollars. But I agree with John's thoughts on how much enthusiasm we got through the small project. Just under the current circumstances, I see it as a real struggle.
Great, thanks, Dave. Any more comments on that? All right, Dave, did you have other thoughts on the amendment?
Not specifically, no. I think what the NRD had put together, NRDP had put together was not unreasonable from my standpoint.
Great, thanks. John Sesso, did you have some comments you wanted to share?
No, I'm having a little trouble grasping the recommendations that Ray went through, and so I think I'll defer to any other comments on the roundtable discussion you got going here. I want to defer to what all the members have to say, and I kind of want to go with the flow there. But then I want to come back to some questions on Ray's recommendations. So how about that?
Great, thanks. All right, Emmett?
So given the enthusiasm for small projects, initially I agreed and fully supported small projects. And if you recall, we've spent endless hours. And if you look at the list, we've had very limited success. And I would, we've approved in lots and lots of projects, but very few of them were successful. So I would support them, but we have to change the way they're managed. The fact that the people have to put up their own money first and then get reimbursed, I think it kills them all, most of them. I don't know if there's a way that NRD can put, that give a loan or somehow financially make it easier for these small projects to succeed, because I don't know how many meetings we've had on small projects, but there's less than a handful that have succeeded. I mean, Norm's Free Veg project and the tech ones really have done the best. So I'd support them if we change how they're financed, because they can have all the small projects they want, but the people aren't successful because of the financing. So that would be one comment. I actually read through the old stuff for this meeting. One thing I'd like, and I don't know if this is the right time, but as we go forward, now that the CD has been signed, I think we need to review all the projects that are referred to in our original work plan when we wrote the present plan. If you go back to this one wasn't, and I don't know if you remember them, but I sure didn't. I looked back through the list, so I think that's something that, as we go forward, with the pot money, wherever they may be, we need to review those list of projects to see what was originally proposed and approved. That's all I have.
Right. Any questions for Emmett? All right. On to you, sister.
Yes, I guess my question refers to the mine waste program. And I'm not sure how much money has been allocated in this amendment for that. Maybe Jim could answer that.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that all. There's some noise in the background.
The dollars allocated to the mine waste re-veg.
How much are they? Is that?
If you could repeat the question, I got kicked off there for a second.
So what is it for the mine waste re-veg?
Well, I can tell you in the consent decree, it has two components of the scope of work that identify new areas that need mine caps under remediation. And then, of course, there's a whole bunch of mine caps that have failed over the years that need to be redone. So that gave us a whole lot more certainty on what was going to be done on the Hill. But of course, as we all know, there are other areas that didn't make those lists that need to be addressed. And that's what the focus of that category would be on. Now, again, it's not for stormwater considerations. You know, that's on EPA and BP's plate. It's for, you know, vegetating unvegetated areas.
So my question though is, how many dollars have been allocated to that re-veg program for mine waste?
And maybe I can answer it here. I do have the table in front of me from the, after the 2019 amendment. So there was money transferred out. What we had, and let me know if I'm not answering this correctly, but what we have left according to that table says that we have 914,000 for soil amendments, placing and seeding. There's 524,000 roughly for Butte Silver Bow's what we call tree project. There was 206,000 for public idea number 50, which was revegetating the Parrot Mine area, and $1 million left for Montana Tech.
Thank you. That was my question.
Okay, for a total of
Appreciate that.
2.6
Okay,
and change.
thank you. That was my question. Now, in looking at this, and we talk about the mine waste, and we talk about the caps that have been in place and have failed, and we talk about caps that need to be in place, I don't think that's our responsibility. I think that's ARCO's responsibility. And so are we going in and cleaning up after ARCO and spending dollars here that could be better spent because they didn't do a good job? Then, you know, we need to look at that, because if it's mine waste caps that have failed, we didn't do those. So who did them and who's responsible? Was it done under remedy? And if there are areas where we still need money to do areas, to cap areas that have not been treated yet, is that our responsibility, or does that belong to ARCO under remedy? Why are we using restoration dollars when it probably should be remedy, and the responsible party would not be us, but it would be ARCO to redo those projects?
So if you were going to move some money from that fund to another, what would you say?
I would probably move some to stream restoration and some also to small projects, because we only have 193,000 in small projects.
All right. Any other questions for Sister Mary Jo? All right. Bill, you're up.
Okay, this is Bill Callahan. What Sister Mary Jo had to say is exactly what I was wondering about, was whether or not we were responsible for that, for the mine waste and the re-veg, and I concur with what she had to say about that. There's not much more I can say, because she said it all as far as that goes, and said it better than I probably would have said it. My other concern with the small projects, and I do agree with the impact that they have had on public participation, but I think I have to agree with what Dave had to say in that I don't know if and when we are going to be able to implement small projects again, considering the present ongoing situation with COVID, number one. And number two, I know that Ray would be the one that would be overseeing that, and it takes a tremendous amount of time, not only on Ray's part, but on the council's part. And I do see some real problems with trying to implement them. I mean, how are we going to go about having public meetings where we can have people explain their projects to us, and so on and so forth? I think everybody's aware of this fact. Not that I'm, you know, I'm kind of betwixt and between about how we're going to deal with that. But, and I guess I would agree, if we were going to reallocate more funds to the small projects, that the good place for those to be coming from will be that $2.6 million in the mine waste and re-veg category that Elizabeth broke down. So those are my comments so far. Thank you.
Okay. Questions for Bill?
Madam Chair, this is John McKee. I think I'm hearing what people are saying about this, you know, how do we do meetings? You know, how do we, you know, set aside the time in this current, you know, period? But I'll remind everybody, we've been meeting for over 10 years. COVID, the last 5 months, has occupied 4%. I just did the math, 4% of the time this committee has been sat. And so to say that, you know, gosh, you know, asking Ray to do meetings right now, no, we don't need to ask him to do that. Asking for how we're going to make public comment work and public participation work, we don't need to ask for that. We just need to take a pause. I mean, 4% of all of our time we've ever sat is all COVID's ever occupied. Give COVID 3 times more than this, and we're only at 10% of the whole time we've ever been sat. And I think we have a real opportunity to not lose trace of the fact that we have this group, and this evolution of this group with its members since day one, have been the number one place where people in this community feel they have a voice. They rail against not being heard by EPA. They rail against not being heard by Butte Silver Bow. They rail against not being heard by everyone else. I don't think you've ever heard anyone rail against not being heard by BNRC. We're the only cats who do it. And so to say that we need to just wait a little bit, you know, 4 or 5 more months before we open the small projects, which is how this would work, by the way. We would allocate this. We would say this is how we want it to go. It goes to the current trustee. The current trustee approves it sometime between now and New Year, which means we're getting into it in March and April of next year. Well, golly. I hear what Dave said. I hear what you said as well, Bill. I just encourage everyone to think that our current reality is not the majority of our existence. And I think that what's coming out of this, forget what has happened up thus far and the amount of, like, you know, just hope we've given people about being able to participate in how we do things, doesn't go away just because we've been out of the loop for 4% of our existence as far as BNRC. So just food for thought. Not an argument, just trying to help everybody understand how I always think about things, the math and the numbers, that they're really not all that far into this, and we have a lot left to offer.
Thanks, John.
I'd like to follow up on what John had to say. I understand what you're saying, John, and I do agree with what you're saying. And considering the time frame, and when we could possibly start implementing these things, and given the fact that there is going to be a change in the trustees, and who knows what that's going to be, I don't have any problems with allocating more funds to the small project at this point. I guess, and rightly so, I think I'm just concerned about the implementation, and I'm sure that's something that can be worked out. But nonetheless, it is, you know, it is disconcerting to think that we may be faced with you know, some hurdles to overcome, but I think that we can probably do that. So, but anyhow, thanks.
Thanks, Bill. Any other comments on that? All right, I'll go last. So my maybe I'll do my 2 cents on small projects first. The thing I totally agree with John on is that I really felt like with small projects, the public was heard and was able to put their projects before the council. Some of the projects were really good, and you know, we funded them. Some of them people just couldn't get the projects done. Maybe didn't have the right. Well, I think that a lot of it was just in the development of them. A lot of them were in the idea stage when we funded them. I guess where I'm at is I think that we've been in this process long enough after 10 years that we kind of have an idea of what those projects are that are left. And my 2 cents, I think we ought to look at projects that need to be done still. I don't want to go out and solicit projects from the community. What I would like to do is maybe have the projects be suggested by the council and then put out for public comment to look at. And things that I'm thinking about, one of the things that we've never really been able to do, and was one of the things that I remember in those very first meetings, we always talked about the best use of the money was to be able to do restoration and remediation hand in hand. And we've never gotten there. We've never had a project really where we've gotten to do that. Now we have a CD. We have a CD that they're going to put work plans together, and we're going to get to see that. I think we may have some opportunities coming up where we could actually augment the remedy that's going to be done with restoration money and actually save money on our side anyway for implementation of those types of projects. So I really would like to take the money and put it aside for a little bit, but have it in a bucket. So I liked the way we did the plan in the beginning, where we had these buckets for stream restoration and re-veg and all of these different projects. I think we can still use those categories, but I think that the small projects, number one, I don't want to fund any more university projects. I think the university system really found out about us. And I think we could come up as a council with some projects that would be really good, and then go out and find the proponents, and then look for that for the community support and see, would you rather have the money spent for re-veg in this area, or would you rather have it spent on stream restoration on, you know, this trib, or and have put those projects out there. So that's my thoughts on that. I also would like to go through the pots of money that we have right now and see if there is money that we would like to move from one pot to another. I agree with Sister Mary Jo that it seems like the re-veg, a lot of that was taken care of in the CD, in the under-reclaimed stuff. And so it seems like we may not need as much in that pot as we now have it. We also have money that will be coming back into so there was money that came out of that pot and went to the Parrot. And so as that comes back in, where do we want it to go? I'm not sure I want it to go back to the re-veg. So those are those are some of the things that I'm thinking about. I'd like to take a look at each one of those pots of money and make sure that the allocations that are there are what we want. The other thing I would challenge us to do as a council is we came up with criteria to look at projects. And I'd like to revisit those and make sure that there isn't tweaks that we would like to make to those criteria on what projects are most important to us. So with that, that's a bit of where my ideas are. Any questions?
Madam Chair, this is John McKee. Oh, sorry, go ahead, David.
Sorry, John. You can go ahead. I'm sitting across from her.
Go ahead, John.
All right, quick question for clarification. You had what I think is a really cool idea. Were you suggesting, and I sort of dig it, is that based upon 10 years of experience and knowing what kind of projects merit or could be used in conjunction with projects, that we either set aside a new bucket or change small projects to, I'm throwing up air quotes right now, small projects directed by council, end of air quotes, meaning we use a little bit of our 10 years, 12 years, whatever experience, and then also like say Cesso's knowledge across the board and all the negotiations he's been doing over the years, like all of us coming together and using our knowledge and experience to better fund and direct just a small project's budget of money rather than to random projects, to projects that we understand would have the most benefit. Was that what you were suggesting? Or if I just come up with something that maybe is coincidental to what you were suggesting? A little bit of clarification.
No, I think you're there, but I guess my one clarification would be that I wouldn't limit it to the $100,000 that the small projects were limited to. If we have a project that's really good that we think would really benefit the basin, that's more than that, that we go out, solicit that project proponent, and get a list of those projects, and then go put them out to the public and see what kind of a response we get, what kind of projects they would really like to see done. And I think we can pick some projects that are really a benefit to the basin.
Humbly agreed. What a cool idea. Thank you.
So would I. That's a good idea.
Did you have another question, Ed?
Yeah, I have two things, and one
Okay.
of the timing might be off. So we've continued to talk about money coming back in. Do we have any idea when that is? Or we don't really know for sure how much or when, do we?
Well, I've heard 4 to 6 years, but maybe staff could help me on that.
Well,
That's our best estimate at this point.
that's EPA's estimate, I think. Yeah.
Perhaps.
I mean, this was year number 1, so they're already down that. So yeah, I would say the brightest scenario is 4 to 6 years, but potentially longer.
Question, and I don't know if now's the appropriate time, but I'll ask it anyway. And that is, are the cleanup that's going to happen on Diggings East and the north side tailings, are they as thorough as we're doing at the Parrot? And I don't know maybe Jim Ford would be the guy to answer that.
Yeah, I could answer that for you. The existing commitment in the consent decree has BP removing to within 2 feet of the high groundwater elevation. So that was what was settled on. So what we had in our plan was removal of all the waste, above or below groundwater that exceeded the stream side criteria, which is the same criteria that we use on the Parrot project. So they are different.
Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot, Jim. So are they as thorough as the Parrot?
No, the Parrot, we're removing all waste, whether they're below or above groundwater until we meet the criteria. So yeah, it is different, and it's even different than what's being implemented on Blacktail Creek, which is basically using the same parrot scheme for the removal, identification and removal.
So I guess that would be one area at some point like to discuss whether that would be somewhere where we would want to put money forward to go the distance.
My
do it
thoughts
correctly.
exactly. Yeah, if they find, waste below that really
Don't
needs to be
stop.
removed, what better use of stream restoration money? I mean,
Right.
it seems to make sense to me that we could say, okay, and I want to be very careful to make sure that they do as much as possible, but they've now defined what that is. So is that, to me, that's a good use of money.
I think so. And so I don't know if now is the time, but I think that needs to be on the table at some point in time that we would look at spending some of our money to go beyond that 2 foot. If you get down there and you find what we found at the parrot, you can't stop. Right? Or you shouldn't.
Right. You're already there. You might as well get it.
Right.
You're there.
We don't want to go back later and do it.
Right.
So this is Doug. So Emmett, what you're thinking is that that would fall under the upper Silverbook Creek corridor waste removal category. And I guess I would ask Jim again of what he thinks of, possibility of integrating those restoration dollars to get more removal.
Well, Emmett, I think it's an excellent idea. I mean, we spent a lot of time in the negotiations. I can't go into the details of the CD, but discussing just that point, why you would stop without removing all the waste. So that's something that we're very aware of. We've done some analysis previous about how much material that would be. I know BP has been out there and collected some additional data since then, but I think that would enable us to put an even better estimate of how much material that would be and how much it would cost. Of course, we'd have to talk with BP and EPA and see about if we could integrate those two things. But I think it's an excellent idea, technically.
Thank you, Jim.
Can I ask a question to that?
Sure.
Mute.
I think you're off.
Am I off?
Yeah.
This is Mary Jo, and my question is, if there is more waste that has to be removed, what is ARCO's responsibility since they're doing remedy? Is it for us to go in and clean up after they leave?
So
I could take a first stab at that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Catherine.
Oh, I was just going to say, I feel like we're getting to the end of the meeting, and since our office is not actually responsible for remedy, I'm wondering if it would make sense for us at a future time to reach out to the folks who are actually responsible for remedy and ask them to come speak to some of these questions.
It would be really beneficial for us to hear from them.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, great idea.
This is Dave, and I'd agree that if we've got the yellow machines there moving stuff, there's no better time to move it. There won't be another time to move it.
There's no cheaper time to move it.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
And there's no better thing that we can do for the basin and long lasting. All right, any other questions on anything we've talked about?
I would have one more question about the discussion that we just had about going to the bottom of whatever's there and whatever else. Or maybe this is something Jim could ask. Do we have, or could we find out and get some kind of an idea when you have the data that you need as to what that's going to cost? Because that would make, that would be a consideration for us in reallocating some of the funds that we have to deal with. And I didn't quite get what you said about how much you know, where we were with that part of the process for the diggings east and the north side. And so is there any idea about when we might have some kind of an idea about cost prices, or how much it would cost us to get the other 2 feet or whatever it's going to take?
Yeah, you know, it's right now it's really hard to say. I mean, you know, BP needs to go out and get bids, you know, select a contractor, get their specs together. I think we could, in fairly short order, meaning a few weeks, get an estimate of the volume of material. And based on that volume, we can compare it to what the costs are for removal of the parrot or other recent projects. So we'd have like a ballpark of a cost. You know, it wouldn't be with a sharp pencil because there's a lot more that needs to be done. I think the more difficult component would be, you know, trying to integrate with all the requirements that BP operates as a private party. But we could figure out a volume and get estimates of costs, and so you guys know if it's a you know, a $500,000 activity or a $4 million activity.
Thanks, Jim. That would be helpful. So.
All right, so I think we've kind of talked about the world of, of the amendments, but we've not narrowed. And I think, Doug, you guys had looked at tentatively some timing on when we needed to pull all this stuff together to be able to get it done by the end of the year. Would you share that with us?
Yeah, we have. So we have looked at schedules and just I don't have one I can put up, Elizabeth, but we have looked at schedules, and where we are right now is, you know, so regardless, there's a couple of things that need to be done. Whatever amendment's done needs to come before the council, and it also needs to go before the public for a minimum of a 30-day public comment period. So what we would like to do is be able to get an amendment in front of the council for you to look at and approve for us to go out for public comment. That would be very helpful. And then have a 30-day public comment period. Then we would need time to address those public comments in a draft response to comments, which we would present back to the council for your consideration and your recommendation to the trustee restoration council and the trustee. And using a start date of August 27th, that was the last meeting we had when we looked at this. We had projected things out, and unfortunately the fall always falls there's the holiday season between Thanksgiving and Christmas that really slows things down, but that's where we would be falling at. We would be pushing into Thanksgiving. We do think we could get it done if we started promptly here and getting through all the process and making sure that we are consulting with the council and giving the public its the time that it needs to consider the alternatives, and then have meetings with the council again, the trustee restoration council, and get it to the governor before the end of the year. But it would be a push. We do think we can do it, but it would be a push. And that's where today we were looking for, or hoping we can get some direction so that we actually can start drafting an amendments that we could put back in front of the council for your, to get a kind of a thumbs up to say, yeah, take that out for public comment.
Madam Chair, a request here. This is John McKee. I mean, you know, this is just project planning. And I haven't seen a Gantt chart. I haven't seen even like an Excel spread that said week 1 of October, week 2 of October, week 3, that just sort of lays this out so that we can see some things. I'm sorry, I don't do a good job just keeping a whole bunch of dates and moving dates in my head. But we haven't even seen a project plan. I guess it would help if we had some sort of slight project plan so we could figure out where our critical paths are, figure out where our pinch points are, because that helps us a whole lot in making these decisions that Doug and staff ultimately really need us to make. And I completely commiserate with you, Doug, on where you need and where you need. But seeing a paragraph or two or three of this date and then this date, it just doesn't work for my head. And I apologize. I'm not good at this. So, but perhaps a little bit different structure, and perhaps just like, what is our drop dead date? When do you really, really, really need? And if you said we've already passed it, tonight's the meeting, and tell us that's it. And to this comment earlier that we need to be done with the meeting, no, we don't. We keep going and we'll get it done. But just tell us where our drop dead date is so we can make it truly happen. So this trustee, Steve Bullock, can make the final decision on what we elect to do here.
Yeah, Jim, do you have the Gantt? I mean, can you provide the Gantt chart, or can you speak to the calendar? You have it, right?
Yeah, I think I could find it. I mean, John, just to get, I understand. I mean, I deal with information a lot better visually also. You know, what we're trying to do though is make sure that we have a reasonable idea what the scope of work is, which sort of drives the schedule, right? So if we were amending 3 different restoration plans, that has an entirely different schedule than like what our recommendations are. So I do have a schedule I could share that was basically the concept of the schedule, the scope of work was, you know, some form of our recommendations. But I could pull that up if that will help.
And Jim, to that point, you don't need to pull up now, or you could, of course, but to John Sesso and Ryan Lynch's point, and then someone's sort of side reel comment about we don't have the same access to the trustee as you guys have. We don't need to necessarily pull all 3 plans in and have them all redone. What we need to do is get our plan redone. We need to make recommendations of what we feel a trustee should do. And if the trustee elects to make a unilateral choice to do those things, fine. If not, fine. But all we really need to do is work on our plan. And all we really need to do is give recommendations that we feel the trustee should put in place. And then the trustee after that just makes those decisions. So I hear that. I'm with you because I do project planning day in, day out, that what about this? What about this? What about that? But I think all those what abouts we can put away. All we're going to say to John Sesso and to Ryan Lynch's point is, trustee, we feel you should do this, and this is our recommendation. And if the council agrees to say that, this is our recommendation. Don't need to call everybody back together. Just throw a unilateral or don't. But on our plan, and only our plan, this is what we feel should be done. And that is not a lift. That's a quick, let's get this done, provided that this team can come together on what we want to do.
So John, we can get you the Gantt chart. I don't know if Jim can put it up or not, but I do believe that we can lift, the direction that the council has provided some here today about, what I got the impression of is there would be a potential to amend the plan to have, to allocate funding to the small projects, for the council to recommend projects. And then, as Emmett said, maybe allocate some dollars to the stream restoration category, or not the stream restoration, but the Upper Silverbuck Creek category to do additional work with remedy. If those are kind of the type of directions that we're given, we can work on those and get those back to the council in a form of amendment for your consideration, and then go out to public comment. I do think we can lift that and get that done. It's a drop dead if we're trying to, as Jim said, bring in other restoration plans and do other amendments. But if that's not the case, then I think we can do that.
So I want to just throw out an alternate thought on this. So you put together an amendment sort of in a memorandum here. I think it would be good if, as a council, we took a look at that amendment and just made the changes that we talked about tonight. And then we can get that back to you and talk about it in a meeting if we need to, put it out before the public, and then start moving along that line. But I think it would shorten the timeline if we maybe took the first shot at the revisions on it. Council members?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Any thoughts from the folks on the phone?
This is Ray, and I think I don't want to speak for the entire program, but that's what we were seeking. Is you guys asked for the amendment, and we've been trying to provide some opportunities, but it'd be really helpful for you to provide us with what you're looking for. So.
Great. Any other thoughts on that?
I need some clarification of this the raise from Ray on your page 2. Let me first clarify. Go back to this business of the re-veg piece. I want to clarify again that the amount that we wouldn't be using any dollars to fix caps or put caps in where they don't exist today. There are 2 work plans in the consent decree. One's called Unreclaimed Areas. There are already nearly 100 acres of area that will get done under remedy. There is also a insufficiently reclaimed areas that caps that weren't done well in the first place and will get redone. No re-veg dollars coming from the BNRC would be used to do any of that work. But that being said, I think it's still important to have a re-veg category because we've been able to go beyond what remedy allows you to do in terms of particularly the installation of native plants and diversifying the species that get planted. And for Buttes over Bow, we call it the tree project, but it really has morphed into the planting of native grasses and shrubs and forbs in areas that have already been reclaimed and are in good shape to enhance the look of the hill. And I would argue for preserving that program so that we had dollars to spend when we're doing the work that's set forth in the next 5 years. These insufficiently reclaimed areas that are going to get redone, the unreclaimed areas that have never been done. As that work all gets done under remedy, having a re-veg program under BNRC has been instrumental in the last several years and will be instrumental going forward. And then having this partnership with Robert Powell and the tech program is I think really worked well because he consults with us on that type of work. So my question for Ray is, when you write about the 50% in your memo where it says 50% of the way you've written it, 50% of the reimbursement funds be allocated to fund the Montana Tech Native Plant Program in consultation with Buttes over Bow. Do you mean 50% of the amount we put back in there based on, because up and on the top of number 3, you got 4 categories: a % to mine waste re-veg category, a % to stream restoration, a % to recreation, and a % to small projects. When I read this week, I was assuming once we know how much money's coming back into the program, and by my estimates, if my $14 million estimate is correct, and a third of that, 35%, goes back to the BAO at a minimum, that's for 4.9, almost $5 million. So is that what you meant? 50% of the percentage that we then outline that would go into re-veg? Or did you mean 50% of all the money coming back would go to the tech program?
Yeah, so thank you very much, John. I'm a great supporter of the revegetation program. And one thing just to say quickly, the goal is to protect contaminated waters from flowing off, Butte Hill. And you're well aware of that. But I consider, there's so many tertiary benefits, which, would be visuals, wildlife habitat, wildlife providing, more diversification of species. So anyway, the quick summary is, as I understand it, and I welcome correction by other members because this was a team effort, but it would be 50% of the remainders. And that's only just an example of our recommendation, John. If you guys want to do 1% of the remainders went to re-veg and 99 to small projects, or vice versa, or 50 to small projects and 50 to another category, that's fine. We're offering that as one approach, which would be sort of the 50-50 of the remainders to recreation and to re-veg, just based on sort of our internal considerations. I'm probably, just briefly, I'll maybe speak out of turn a little bit, but I'm a great supporter of the revegetation efforts. It sort of speaks to my specialty in terms of wildlife habitat and ecology. So, and yeah, so it's a high priority for me. And like I said, it's, yeah, I just want to add that. And then the small projects, I just did want to say, John, I think they're wonderful for building community engagement in the natural resource damage program and all the work we've done. So I couldn't agree with you more in terms of that being an important category. So this is your decision space. We just put out, what we saw as some opportunities. And with that, I'll offer any additional comments from NRDP, and then, back to you, John. So.
Well, I'm confused.
Okay.
My question was, under number 3 of your memo, you said, assuming funding will be reimbursed to the BAO, council could consider making a recommendation to allocate to those 4 categories: mine waste, stream restoration, recreation, and small project category. So that's like point A. And then under point B, are you saying your recommendation is to not do that and instead take 50% of all the money coming back from the Butte site account and put it in tech, and the other 50% in recreation?
Okay, I totally understand your question, John, and why there's not enough clarity there. I apologize. So it would be up to the council to decide which proportions go in each one of those pots. We offered as sort of a straw dog that it would be 50% to rec and 50% to re-veg. But it's a council's opportunity to make those recommendations.
Well, okay. Well, I'm not. The other question I had is, of the in addition. So when I looked at that flow chart that you had on there about where all the money goes, it has this $2.5 million that's coming back to Butte Area One, and my question is that 2.5 of the 5 million, is that in addition to the 35% that would come back in a reimbursement from the Butte site account after Blacktail is done?
Okay.
John, this is Doug, and yes, it is.
Yeah.
In addition?
Yes, so the 2.5 was allocated. When that gets transferred from SST to the Butte Area One Fund, in that 2019 amendment, it goes for restoration, stream into the stream restoration category, and there are provisions within that amendment for what those funds can be spent on. Basically, stream restoration per the BAO plan.
Okay, so what I would ask is that we start with the chart that you had in the memo for the August 27th meeting, where you had the 4 or 5 categories, the original amount, the amounts that's been spent in the category, and the current balance of the category. And then we need to add, then we have to have a placeholder then on how much we would add to the categories in these 4 that are here. So we could then play with the percentages up top. And then if you could reflect that 2.5 in that stream restoration category, that I think would be a nice template for us to then, work together as a council on. I think my recommendation is that we should, kick around some percentages of these dollars coming back into the program, how much to allocate to the re-veg category, to the stream restoration, to recreation, and to small projects. And there seems to be quite a bit of support for the small projects. And then we would have a couple of assumptions. If my data is correct, it's going to be at least $4.9 million from the money coming back to the BAO plus the 2.5 million. So it's 7.4 million. And then when we applied these percentages, we would get a sense of how much we would be adding back in addition to what's already there, still there from the existing dollars. And that would give us a head start on making these amendments and getting them done in the next couple weeks. It would be my recommendation. You know what I mean? So we'd have the original in column 1. We'd have the category. In column 2, we'd have the original appropriation made in the 2012 plan. In column 3, we would have the money spent in those categories in these first 8 years. Column 4 would be the current balance. And then column 5 would be the recommended amounts we would add based on an amendment. And then we would just do that by percentage. They would just be placeholders, but we would do that by percentage. But as we decided, okay, say we wanted to put another $1 million or $2 million in small project category, we would kind of know what percentage to put in there, and say we wanted to put $1 million, and 2 million in the mine waste, the re-veg category. That would add up to the $7.5 million I'm talking about, because the 2.5 would already be in stream restoration category. Then we would kind of know, it would give us a nice guide to how much we should add to each of the 4 categories. And I can put the chart together if nobody gets what I'm saying and distribute it to everybody.
Yeah, this is Ray. I'd like to hear the input of other members, but that sounds to me like an appropriate request, which is consistent with what you and McKee are asking. So there'll be some uncertainties because there are funds that are committed, that are unspent, and so forth. But in principle, it's how much money do you have to play with is what you need to know to make some decisions. The only thing is we don't know exactly how much that incoming amount is. So like you say, it would have to be percentages.
That's right.
And Doug, I welcome, or Catherine or Jim, any inputs or corrections if I'm off the mark.
Well, I
This
would
is
just
Dave.
add this.
Ed.
I'm sorry, Dave. This is Jim Ford. John, I just add that even the $2.5 million coming from stream side still needs to be requested from DEQ, and then of course it needs to be approved by EPA. So even that money coming back, has sort of a process and hopefully a timeline that we can fit into it, but we can't really commit that until it's, over. But of course, that's where using percentages would help alleviate that.
This is Dave. Yeah, John's chart sounds like it would be worth looking at. I need some visual.
This is Elizabeth. I like that idea. And then if we had it in an Excel file, we can put that appropriated. I mean, you can just put a line underneath it showing stuff that maybe is already appropriated. And I think it gives us a good way to see how much money is in each of those funds. And that, along with the Gantt chart kind of showing timing, would really help us be able to put this amendment together well.
And of course, there'd be the original categories, the one that was in the presentation tonight, where we have the corridor, the re-veg, the stream, the recreation, the small projects. We didn't put anything in the stormwater, so we could eliminate that one. But those are the 5, right? We just have to add on Ramo, we would just add the corridor, whatever that one's called, the parrot one. And so that would allow us to put in a little placeholder for if we wanted to pay some unit cost removals above and beyond the remedy, that would allow us to put a placeholder in there too. I mean, I can envision what I'm describing here. I just, once we got clear that the recommendations were kind of distinct from our percentage idea up on top, then I kind of got it. So.
Yeah, Doug's got so this lays out, I think, I mean, it's consistent with what you're saying, John, is totally consistent with the categories that we have for Butte Area One. And, the main problem is we don't know what the incoming dollars are. That's kind of, but yes, you're saying you're recommending a percentage. It seems to me like a very workable approach.
Yeah, well, we would just make this assumption.
Yeah.
And then plug in the percentages. And if the assumption was correct,
right,
then we'd know how much we're actually recommending in those categories. If the assumption turns out to be less or more, we would have less or more in each of those categories, but at least the percentages would line up with our priorities.
Mm-hmm. And if you're assuming 5 million and it ends up, yes, I agree with that. I think it would be a good approach.
We can just set it up as formulas in the cell, and then when you can throw 5 million in there and see what that looks like, and then you can throw 3 million in there and it'll recalculate it all for what that would look like. So we can look at a couple of different what it would look like with different amounts coming back.
Yes, and we would start with the original 5.2.
That's great.
Well, hoping we'd win our other argument on that other side of the page that we talked about earlier. So I think we should do that. If you guys know at the staff level what I'm saying, you could take the first crack at it, or you could send me the spreadsheet that was presented in that in Sharon's setup the other day on the 27th. And I could start on it, but I think you know what I mean.
Oh, go ahead, Doug. My apologies.
So John, the spreadsheet that Shannon provided at the last meeting that gave this outline that's here, but with the current costs and current expenditures, and then we can provide that as an Excel spreadsheet for you, and then Yes, and then if you can play around with it, or if you want us to help you play around with it, we can work with
Yeah.
that.
Hers was top down. She had the categories on top, I believe.
She
And
did.
then, yeah, and so we would add a couple of rows after the current balance to reflect how we would reallocate the, and even make some changes if we wanted to take some out of a certain category and put it in another. That's what we should do.
Okay, and we can talk to you about exactly what we'll give you. I think we could simplify that table as well, because there's a lot of rows in there.
That's right. We don't need the rows about, the explanation of the one kind of direct costs and then the indirect costs and all that. That just could be assumed as spent to date, right? So.
Yeah, we can just have that as expenses. Okay, we'll get that to you.
Do we have other thoughts from the council more generally about that recommendation? I mean, I think we're good there, but yeah, I just want to bring that around in terms of other voices. Does anybody else have anything to say at this juncture? We did reserve some time for public comment, and I'm aware that Robert Paul wanted to speak to the revegetation and work that they've done with Butte Silverbow County, and I think that's relevant certainly to everything that John's talked about with reveg.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Can you guys hear me? Hello?
Yes.
So good evening, and I listened to these conversations with a lot of interest, because it's kind of defining a lot of futures and outcomes that could happen out on the Butte Hill. And I just would like to kind of just comment, because that's what best I can do. And I feel like, of course, I'm talking to our own interest as well, but I feel like one of the best investments that really the NRD and the BNRC kind of supported was really the Native Plan program, I feel like. And it's because we were able to really build a program, and we actually got into with this really extremely great collaboration with the agencies and specifically Butte Silverbow as a university. And I think it's just getting better and better year by year. And of course, for the longer, we would like to see us also, that investment of the NRD and of course throughout BNRC would not fall apart. And, in a way, we are also asking to take us. I also feel like, we are using Montana Tech faculty and students, and we can come up with better and better restoration techniques year by year for the hill. And we are actually also being able to publish our research. So it's not just serving the Butte community, which is the first and the most important goal, but we actually are taking out our results to kind of more of also like a global perspective. And so in a way, anybody else in the science of ecology should be able to learn from our successes. And besides just the re-veg of Butte Hill, we are taking also, as Ray talked about, these tertiary focuses. And, that as the CAPs are working out on the hill, we are trying to move them to our goal in the end on the Butte Hill. And I think we are succeeding to bring a lot of the habitats up to that point, as Ray also mentioned, putting it to a better wildlife habitat, and also focusing more on the visuals as well. We're learning from our mistakes and of course of our successes. So beside basically all the stormwater runoff and water quality, we in a way, taking it to restoration, we are able to focus on that as well. So I just feel like that it's just serving the best goal. And of course, if those those funds come back to the Butte Area One, we would be also very happy if that collaboration and our goals to improve restoration on the Butte Hill can just thrive and further develop. And that was, I feel like, my comments were, and thank you for the NRDP program and for the BNRC to supporting us so far. And it was great to listening to everybody, even in this strange environment that we are right now. And I also wanted to say that, building a program at Montana Tech right now, thanks to the NRD program, right now we are working with restoration certificates, a restoration master's program. So, and that all is thanks you guys programming. Thank you. I don't know what do I need to do.
Robert, thanks for listening in, and we appreciate your comment. And I think I can speak for the whole council when we say that, again, this project and the coordination with Butte Silver Bow has been one of the great successes of this whole council and this fund.
Yeah, thank you. And I understand that, and I feel that from the council all the time. I just thought I would like to mention, and you mentioned that the universities, and they discovered it. We also consider us, of course, the universities for the projects that were small projects were funded, and Montana Tech students that work with me, and they all complete their projects. And in a way, I feel like I don't know in what context did you mean the universities, but I feel like in our environment, projects in being a success, talking about Mark Mariano's GIS project of Butte Silver Bow overall, yes. And we had this project from Joao, which is kind of restoration management system, which we will use, and which is hopefully by the end of this year will be finished and will be serving supply for native plants on the Butte Hill. So that is the environment, which I think also really great are helping the community and community student members as well.
I agree. Thank you for reminding us about all those great projects.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Have a great evening.
You too. Thanks.
Thank everybody, and thanks for letting me speak.
Thanks, Robert.
Yeah.
All right. Do we have any other comments from the public?
Elizabeth, this is Helen Joyce. I didn't get a chance to speak, but I did come on a little bit late, like 6:20 or something. So I apologize for that, but I've been listening to the discussion. I do love the idea of small projects, but I agree that it needs some way of more effective implementation of those. And then I think it would be a good time to check in with SARDA, because several projects are funded by both us and SARDA. Get the status from SARDA and ensure that we're not, duplicating funding or anything with the limited dollars we have. That's it.
Great. Thank you, Helen. right, do we have any more comments from anyone? All right, so I think what I heard as action items is we'll get a spreadsheet and a chart from NRD, and then we will circulate it within the council and get work on an amendment to get back to you guys. And
Okay, Elizabeth, that's fine. Yes, thank you for that. If you can get that, we will give you, we will get John and we'll CC everybody at the table for you to, for that exercise, and we can, maybe we can help with some of the equations. I don't know if you have that ability or not, but let us know about any help that you need there. And then we'll also get you, as John asked for, a schedule and a time frame for, you know, where we need to, where the drop dead date is on this stuff. So
sounds great.
all right.
All right. With that, do I have an emotion to adjourn?
So moved.
Sister moves. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, you guys. Thanks for everyone for being here. Meeting is adjourned. Appreciate all your time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Good night. Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone.